So this morning, our orchestra did a reading of my piece, Treeship. A typical reading session, the purpose of that is to allow both the composer on the creative side of things and the performer to get acquainted with the work for the first time. And generally, what differentiates a reading from a rehearsal is the preparation. So a reading is always going to be of a work that is generally quite new. And in this case, this is a piece that has not been heard by either myself or by the orchestra or by the music director. So I was very nervous. In the hall were a couple of people that I know pretty well. So there's composer advisor Gary Kalesha and the RBC resident conductor Shalom Bard, as well as the principal librarian Gary Corin. And they were all there to observe the process and give me some feedback. At the top of the rehearsal, Peter Unjin walks on stage, and he asks me and Gary Kalesha to come on the stage and say a few words to the orchestra. So Gary Kalesha just made a few notes to the orchestra about the purpose of the reading, and then he asked me to talk about the piece. And musicians tend to like that because they sort of want to hear what the composer had in mind. This piece is called Treeship, and it's a fantastic paradox because, of course, there's no such thing as a tree ship that I know of. But it's really inspired by some imagery that I was very drawn to as a child. The films of Hayao Miyazaki, which are animations, have this kind of fantastic imagery where you have things like flying castles and moving castles and just combinations of nature and technology that you wouldn't think would go together, and somehow they have this weirdly harmonious relationship. A direct reference for this title is Dan Simmons' Hyperion, in which he describes tree ships as these vast spaceships that are organically constructed. Sort of the interior of a ship is like a trunk of a tree. Somehow I found this imagery, this collision between culture and nature, to be very inspiring, and also loaded with musical metaphors, which I wanted to explore in this piece. So the piece is really kind of a journey through difficult straits and through moments of beauty, moments of tension, sort of like the journey of this vast ship, but where all the musical material is kind of alive and teeming like an organism. And that's really a metaphor for what the orchestra is. So at the very end of the reading session, actually all of the parts from the musicians go back to me, but with a lot of pencil scribbles from the musicians. And they were actually encouraged to do this in the reading to give me feedback. And most of the feedback is technical in nature. So, for example, there's, what is it? This is horn 3, and this person has written in my part cue wrong, and which is a little bit embarrassing because the whole point of a cue is to actually allow the musician to come in the right place and facilitate their entry. And the cue is basically a piece of music from another part of the orchestra that the person who's not playing can listen for and then be able to actually enter in the right place. And so I've got the cue wrong, which means that the thing that they're listening for is now in the wrong place. So that's something that I would then go back and obviously fix because I don't want people to come in the wrong place. And there are many, many examples of this kind of thing that no matter how careful a composer is with the proofreading process, and we are encouraged to proofread as much as possible. I've tried to do that a lot with this piece. But no matter how careful, there will always be little things that slip through the cracks. And that's one of the reasons why a reading session is so great for catching all those mistakes, so that when the actual performance happens, you know the score is what you want. Peter Unjin marked up the score prior to actually reading it, and so a lot of his feedback was actually in the score, and he would sort of he would write in initials KL to represent me, and then give a little bit of an indication, like bars 71, question mark, inflection, and it would just be one word, but I would know what he meant from our prior discussions. So one of the sections that I heard today and I thought a little bit about possibly changing is there's a section here, and is all marked up with Peter's writing. He actually color codes his scores, so blue indicates beat patterns for how it should be conducted, and red indicates cues, which sort of signifies entries of instruments. So those are very technical things. But then he'll also write things like horn inflection, KL, meaning that's something that I should check over. So where you sort of see this little circular hat with the dot here, that's a fermata, which is an indication of a pause in music. And the previous phrase is coming to a bit of a pause here, and then it resumes with this passage in the viola here, which is part of the main trunk, I would say, part of the main melody. So the orchestra played this quite beautifully today. My concern, and this is part of why the reading is useful, was that this melody here is being obscured a little bit by some of the texture and the colors that are happening in this section here, which is the woodwinds. And the woodwinds are creating a little bit of extra color. I like that texture, but I think it's a little bit too overwhelming. So I've gotten the parts back from the musicians, and I've gotten Peter's very colorful, marked up score. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back home and basically implement some of the changes that have been suggested to me by the musicians and by Peter. And I also sort of want to go over a little bit of how I felt about the reading, and see if there are any of my own changes that I want to make, because ultimately it's sort of a vision of my music that has now been sort of presented, and this is really an opportunity, one that doesn't come along very much, but it's an opportunity for me to go back and revise something that I think might need some revising. And then at some point before the concert, well, it's actually about a month before the concert, I will have to finalize those changes and send it back to the library so that they can print off a new set of parts and a new score. And that will be the final piece that will be performed.